We are going to get started with this webinar to a topic very close to my heart. My name is Kevin Grossman. I'm the president of global programs at Talent Board, which I want to talk a little bit more about in just a couple of minutes. But I want to welcome you all today on behalf of Talent Board as well as Talemetry. And very excited to have the CEO and founder of Talemetry on, which I'm going to introduce him in just a second. I also want to, of course, thank Talemetry being one of our sponsors for the Talent Board Candidate Experience Awards, and that will make a little bit more sense in a minute when I talk about Talent Board. But first, I want to turn it over to Jade for a minute and let him talk a little bit about Talemetry. Jade? We're just waiting for Jade. Should I move on?
Hey everybody, sorry.
Yep.
Sorry about
There
that.
you are. Hey, Jade.
I'm in. Sorry. So yeah, thanks very much, Kevin, and I look forward to sharing with you what Talemetry does. Our focus is providing a recruitment marketing platform to clients to manage how they reach out to candidates and drive applications into their recruitment programs. And in that, obviously, the candidate experience is a big part of our focus in terms of how that works for candidates and how that translates to value for our clients. And we work with clients across the spectrum in terms of different industries. And when we interact on a monthly basis with over 1 million candidates on our clients' career sites, I think we have a lot to share, and we look forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you, Jade, so much. And thanks again for being one of the sponsors of the Talent Board program. Let's talk a little bit about Talent Board just for about a minute. So Talent Board is a nonprofit organization, actually the first nonprofit research organization. It's all about elevating and promoting a quality candidate experience. We were founded in 2011. For those that don't know much of any about our program, and ever since, every year we do survey research with employers around the world, asking them to first self-assess about what they're doing in recruitment and how they kind of judge their own candidate experience, and then in turn targeting a population of their candidates, also asking them questions about their candidate experience from pre-application to onboarding. And it's a confidential and risk-free survey research program for both the employers and the candidates. And that's what we do here at Talent Board. And this is kind of gives you a global scope in what we do. And part of our namesake is the Candidate Experience Awards. So every year we also give away awards to those companies that have the highest positive candidate ratings in our survey research. And you can see this year the scope of the program. We're actually just finishing our EMEA and APAC programs, which is why we don't have a number of winners listed there. But just really quick to show you, these are the companies this year that won in North America. Companies big and small across industries, many recognizable brands as well, I'm sure that you would all see. And these are the companies that, again, win our awards based on having the highest positive candidate ratings in our survey research. So what I want to do now is start sharing some data. There's going to be a lot of data that we're going to share today and talk about between myself and Jade. The importance, especially on the front end, so the kind of attraction, employment, branding phase of recruitment through application, and a lot of things that you could and should be doing in those particular parts of the recruitment process to improve not only candidate experience overall, but also just your recruitment as well, and the potential more positive impact on your business is something we're also going to talk about more. One thing I like to do in a webinar setting or a live setting is ask two, three, four different questions about who do you think has the better candidate experience, and kind of posing the question to you. So just imagine that we're sitting in the room together, and you can pretend to raise your hand to me, but who do you think has the better candidate experience, older or younger candidates? And the delineation here is, in our survey research, we don't ask for age, but we do ask for them to identify with a generation. So in this case, the way we kind of drew the line is everybody born before 1982 was quote unquote older, so don't throw anything at me. And those that are born after or on and after 1982 are considered younger. So who do you think? Well, according to our data, at Talent Board, when we actually correlate this with a Likert scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest score and 5 being the highest, asking them overall how they would rate their experience with these employers, younger wins by a 12% margin, actually, saying that they have a better overall candidate experience in our research. It's a little bit lower than it was the year before, which was 16%, but definitely a significant difference between older and younger candidates overall. Now that we'll do one more before we move on. And this one is, who do you think has the better candidate experience, the managerial or non-managerial candidates? And again, I'll give you a hint. Think about the last slide that we just shared. And again, non-managerial candidates have about a 12% higher relative candidate experience to those to managerial candidates. And this is, again, down from about 16%. And there are a lot of reasons. We could talk about this for the whole rest of the webinar if we wanted to, about why this is the case for both younger and non-managerial. But one of the reasons that we assume, based on the survey research that we do, is that especially for managerial candidates, there's more complexity in the hiring process and the recruitment process, more hoops to jump through, versus those that are either entry level or frontline employees. So let's move on. And then again, just to give you that breakdown by generation in our research this year, this trend's very similarly every year. We always see a little bit fewer baby boomers in the mix, a little bit more on the millennial side, and of course Gen Z will continue to see growing in the workplace. I just was told that recently that the oldest millennials are now like 37 or 38. Dang, I'm feeling old now. There you go. And then lastly, before I let Jade talk some more about some recruitment marketing and other data from his perspective, I want to share some key ratings on how we actually determine in the competitive context who wins a CandE and who doesn't, and kind of give you a compare and contrast. So there's one of the key ratings is overall rating, asking the candidates to rate on a 1 to 5 Likert scale, with 5 being the highest score. You can see how the CandE winners who win our awards versus just general population, how they have a nice edge on the 4 and 5 star side when it comes to what they're doing. And we're going to talk about some of those things today, at least from the attraction and application perspective. Then if I go to the next rating, which is asking them, it's kind of an NPS-like question, that promoter score-like question, but a 4-point scale instead that we developed years ago. And we asked the candidates how willing based on their experience, how willing are they to apply again to this particular organization that is surveying them. And you can see that CandE winners significantly have the edge on the extremely likely side, about 10% difference. And again, we're going to talk about some of the things that they're doing differently. Then the next question is that is one of our key data points, is how likely are they to refer others based on their experience. And again, you can see by a 12% margin, CandE winners have an extremely likely edge there when it comes to the data. And then the last one that I'll share in this context is what we call our relationship question. And I'll bring this home again at the end when I talk about business impact. But this one is really, again, it's a 4-point scale that goes from, I had a negative candidate experience, I'm going to sever the relationship, which means literally I won't apply again, I won't refer others, I won't buy stuff if and when applicable. And then the other end of that is, I had a great candidate experience, I'm going to increase the relationship, which would be just the opposite, obviously, of the negative side, that I'm definitely going to do more of these things, whatever that means to the candidate. And of course, that's going to vary across industries, B2B, B2C companies. But you can see, again, another 10% edge that the winners have when it comes to providing a great candidate experience. And now I'm going to let Jade talk a little bit more about recruitment marketing.
Yeah, as we thought about what would be relevant to share in the context of candidate experience, we thought having a quick conversation initially on recruitment marketing overall, and then we're going to share some thoughts on how you can ensure that your candidate experience is a focus point through your recruitment marketing efforts here in a second. But you know, when we look at recruitment marketing and the activities, you know, on the left-hand side, we talk about audience and exposure. Who are you reaching out to? Your outbound marketing to your known candidates. These are people that you have their name and their email address or their phone number in a database, and whether you sourced that data from a third-party database or a job board, etc., or whether these are people in your past applicants or people that have registered interest in your company before in a CRM system. You've got them in a CRM system, and you're reaching out to them from an outbound marketing perspective and trying to gain their interest in your company. Then your inbound marketing, your attraction-based marketing to people you don't know yet, your advertising, social media, etc., people that don't know about your company, you don't have their name, but you're putting yourself out there where they probably are to gain interest and attract them in. If you look at those two types of audience and your exposure, obviously in marketing, the game is to get more people in a targeted way interested in your company and in your jobs. And as you do that, then you bring them in and you show them various types of content, whether that's jobs or whether that's other interesting content, often in your career site or landing pages around a career site. And then your job is to convert those interested people that you've gained exposure with into, in marketing terms, we call this conversions, and in recruiting, we call this, applicants, right? And making sure that you're focused on how many people are you engaging, how many people then are actually applying, and also with an eye to not just applications, but what other things are great results from a campaign, which it might be, hey, I'm reaching out to these people just to let them know about my company, and what I want them to do is register to get more information from my company in the future. I'm not looking for applications, and that's a great alternate conversion of a campaign. At the end of the day, whether it's your applications or that extra information that you're gathering on these people, that all goes into your CRM. So you're building more and more and more information on individuals over time as they engage with your company or apply for jobs. And in the long term, the knowledge that you have on the people you're reaching out to and building in your database allows you to provide more and more targeted marketing. You can reach out knowing in context, hey, you applied for a job last year, here's another one that's similar. Obviously, the more personalized that is, the better response you're going to get. And that's, the intent of a recruitment marketing platform overall, is to provide the capability to do all of those things. And that's what Talemetry focuses on. So with that context, what we thought we would do is, in the next slide, Kevin, just share a few thoughts on key things to keep in mind as you're running recruitment marketing campaigns. And the first is making sure that you're matching your candidate experience to your relationship. So if you've never met somebody, they've never applied for a job, they don't know who you are, you probably want to reach out to them a little bit differently and provide a different candidate experience to them than somebody who has applied for a job over the past several years that you maybe didn't hire, or an alumni who you might be reaching back to come back to work for you. Obviously, so matching the candidate experience to those individuals is important. So the type of content that you show them is probably different. It can be more personalized if you know more about them. And if you think of yourself as a consumer being marketed to, the more personalized the message and the more relevant it is to you, the more your consumer experience is going to be improved. So I think most people can relate to that a targeted email that actually knows something about you, it gets a better response. So that's the first point. And that speaks to the second in terms of personalization and relevance. So that picking your audience and making sure that your program relates to them and making that as personalized as possible is really important, and making sure that your messages are relevant. Reducing unnecessary work for the candidate. So through the process, if there's a lot of administrative retyping of information that people have to do, if you think about this, if somebody has applied to your job in your company in the past, and you're reaching out to them to say, hey, apply for this new job, you probably have all the information to pre-populate the application form for them. So you should probably be doing that through your technology so that they're not having to do it again, right? So making it as easy as possible to not have to, if you go to buy something from Amazon and you've been there many times before, you don't have to re-enter your credit card information. They know that automatically when they reach out to you, and they make it as easy as possible to come back and do that again. So that's what we're talking about in terms of reducing unnecessary work. Taking a long-term view of your talent pool in terms of, when you're interacting with somebody, whether it's your website, providing them content, or them applying for a job, or you reaching out, making sure that your system and capabilities are there so that you're attracting all of that information into a central point so that you have a long-term view of that person. You can see what happens to them over time, and keep in mind to the next point that it's not a single experience, it's a long-term experience. An experience with somebody isn't the one process that they applied to a job. It's over time that builds. They have several interactions. They come back to your website many times. They come back and apply for jobs over time. And it's really important to take a long-term relationship approach when you're thinking about the experience that people have, not a point in time when they applied for one job only. I think at the end of the day, getting applications into your company is the primary goal out of this from an ROI perspective, from a marketing perspective it is, and making sure that you are driving relevant applications and that's a measurement that you're looking at, and making sure that you improve the results of how you convert before you're investing a lot. So we see a lot of clients who are spending a lot on outreach campaigns and marketing and activities to get candidates to come into their organization. And when you go and look at how many people start an application to how many people finish, it might be 20%. So any money that you spend and any effort you spend to drive more applications and get more people into your organization, if you're only converting 20% of your leads, you're only getting a 20% return on your money. So our view always is that you want to make sure that your conversion, which is a key part of your candidate experience, is really optimized as a primary focus before you're spending more and more effort driving people in. So those are some thoughts that we see at a high level that I think are important to think of when you're driving your broader recruitment marketing campaigns and thinking about candidate experience, Kevin.
Absolutely. Marketing is recruiting, recruiting is marketing. They're inextricably linked. And I can tell you one of the things that that you touched on that I'm gonna continue to underscore throughout the rest of this presentation is there's always multiple touch points, even before candidates apply and during the application process, and even obviously beyond, things that we're not even going to discuss today, where there's an opportunity every single time to have to convey some perceived positive fairness value in the transaction with your candidates. That's a differentiator we see every year in our research of communication and feedback, even before they apply, pre-application all the way to onboarding. So that's something that I'm gonna drive home even further. Here's some key highlights. Every year we ask the candidates that participate in our research, and again, we had 180,000 this year in North America participate. We asked them questions about what they did before they applied for a job at that employer, because the employers actually target the populations of candidates directly. So again, the feedback is for the employers that participate in our program. And a couple of quick notes. Most of us out there are doing our own job research. It's this year, this has trended every year, this almost the same exact way. About 3/4 of the candidates that participate say they're doing their own research, and it's pretty much held steady. It's a much smaller percentages overall, even when we dig into some further data, folks that are actually being sourced directly, technology professionals, nursing, you name it. But most of us are doing our own research. I'm not going to read every single one, but I just want to hit some of the highlights. Here, every year we ask the candidates as well, what are they consuming and what research channels are they using before they apply for a job at that employer, or that employer of interest, or whoever it is that they're applying to. And as a research channel, obviously, once I decide on a brand that I'm interested in, career site is the number one. First, I'm probably going to be doing a search online and finding it across job boards, however I come across it. But once I know I'm interested in a brand or a business, an organization, then I focus on the career site and go beyond. One thing that's always I love pointing out is that it continues to grow, is that referrals are becoming a much bigger resource for candidates themselves to lean on. As employers, we talk about this all the time, how important referrals are, right, to our organizations. But it's actually jumped, 14+% in the past couple of years for candidates themselves to lean more heavily on their networks. We've told each other for years to build and nurture your network and leverage it, and now the candidates are doing more of that, at least through our research. And then, of course, employer review sites, and Glassdoor is not the only one that's out there. There are other ones, new ones entering the market. The point is, though, is that these reviews are out there. People are talking about what it's like to go through your hiring processes. This is a reality, and it's never going back the other way. It's only going to continue to increase. Marketing content, values, culture are always important to candidates. They tell us this trends almost every single year, and as well as employee testimonials. By the way, this is not the exhaustive list. If you were to download any of our research from our site, which is free to download, there's a lot more choices. These are just some of the key takeaways. And of course, on job content, it should be no surprise that the job description, salary, and benefit are really important to the candidates, so the kinds of content they consume. We started asking it a little bit differently this year too, of also what else they would like to see more of, what they wish they had more access to. And on the marketing side, they really want to know more about why people are working and where they're working. That's what they want to hear. So however they find that information on your career site, on employer review sites, etc., this is what they wanted to see more of before they make a decision on either actually applying and or going any further in the process. And on the job content side, what's interesting is that they want to see more, what makes for a successful candidate, which is actually not a bad idea, as well as, what are my options as a career path? What are those options? And I think that's really important to think about as you're building out that pre-application research information on the attraction side. Then we also ask, before they applied for a job, what are they being asked for any feedback? And I bring this up because, as I mentioned, communication and feedback are big differentiators in our research every year between those who have higher positive candidate ratings and those who don't. And when we correlate this with a 1 and 5 star poor and great experience, those who are having a crummy time overall are never being asked for any feedback, especially before they apply. And most companies don't at this stage, but more companies are starting to. And you can see there are some smaller percentages of those who are having a much better overall 5-star candidate experience. They're being asked for feedback before they even apply. So this is something that we're seeing a trend on, more investment on the front end during attraction and application of asking them actually for feedback about the process, even so much as putting something on your career site that says, tell us what you think about our career site, and or write a review on Glassdoor before anybody even applies. So trying to get that kind of engagement going before they go any further. And then when we just look at the overall rating, comparing winners and all the other companies, you can see that there's an 8% difference on the 5-star side between CandE winners and just overall general population. Let's talk a little bit about what that means, because some of the things that the companies that have higher positive candidate ratings are doing on a regular basis is that obviously their career site still matters, and they're leveraging other multimedia when it relates to promoting their jobs. Video is being used a lot more, actually having maybe a brief video of the hiring manager saying, this is what the job is and you're going to be working for me and this is what it's like. Testimonials from other employees, just really mixing it up instead of that static text job description that just kind of our eyes glaze over when we read through it, right? That's a differentiator. Employee testimonials, more of the customer service approach. And I'm going to talk about that and when I get to the next slide a little bit more, but think about how today, before we make purchases of products and services, we're doing a lot more engagement online. We're reading reviews online. We're asking questions, right? We're going to the FAQs. We're going to the chat bots that are on these sites saying, hey, I want to learn more about your products and services. Well, that's being applied to recruitment now as well, and being able to answer those questions. And again, communication and feedback, huge differentiators throughout the process, particularly even more so on the front end now. So this is kind of a very simplistic way to emphasize that everything we do in talent acquisition is, we always talk about it in a linear fashion, like we go to attraction and application and then screening and interview and on and on. But we all know in talent acquisition that it's not that clean. It's a much more of a messy process that's constantly looping back on itself. So I just wanted to try to convey this cyclical pattern of things that happen constantly when it comes to the attraction branding pre-application stage. So, again, emphasizing leveraging multimedia in your marketing, in your targeted messaging using a recruitment platform like Talemetry that's relevant and targeted to the audience that you want to get in front of. Employee testimonials, using either static Q&A FAQs on your site, live chats, chat bots, which are being experimented more with in recruitment now. Just having general questions answered about culture, jobs, etc., so that there's more time freed up for the recruiters to do more hands-on, which is, again, an important customer service perspective when it comes to recruitment. Leveraging the social channels, nurturing the candidates, and then of course, getting them to convert, to apply, especially those that are the more qualified candidates at the end of the day, and then constantly looping back all the time on itself is something that's really important. Like we see, at least with the CandE winners and of the companies overall. And then I think, Jade, you're going to add some tips as well at this point, right, about the attraction phase?
Yeah, I think what we think is really important here is always keeping your target in mind. So when you're crafting to outreach at the beginning, thinking about the experience for that audience, as we talked about before. So in an attraction perspective, to the outcomes that you want. Are you trying to get a better relationship with them, or are you trying to drive them right to an application and make sure that experience is relevant to the people? And I think then as you look at the various channels in front of you and you say, well, how can I reach that audience? Is this an audience best to reach out with an email or a phone call? Is it an audience that's best to reach out through advertising and attract them in? I don't have the relationships today. What's really important through this whole process is making sure that you have the ability to measure those channels and those vendors that you're going to use to reach those candidate audiences in place, so that over time you can see what's working and what isn't working for you. And we find a lot of time is spent on channels that aren't working if you don't have those metrics and analysis and the capabilities in place. So marketing today and modern marketing is based on real metrics and real data, as all the data you're sharing us here is guiding our listeners next campaigns, I hope, Kevin. I think that what we believe is that putting these measurement capabilities in place is critical, so you can see what works and drive your results from that data in terms of what you do next. Focusing on the long-term relationships and making sure that you're not just driving these people to applications, but you're driving the responses to learn more about these individuals and building a long-term relationship, as we talked about before. And overall, making sure, from an effectiveness perspective, we see clients who start with driving 5% of their candidates and applicants come through their previous relationships in their CRM system or whatever they're using to manage candidate relationships, up to now, as they drive more mature capabilities and bigger databases of talent and more robust relationships, up to 60-70% of their hires coming from their talent database. That's more cost effective. It's more conducive to a candidate experience because you're reaching out to people and you're building on that relationship longer term. So from a cost ROI perspective and from a results perspective, our view is if you can drive that as your goal to make your talent database your number one source of how you drive your applicants in for the open jobs you have, you're going to win on all of those fronts.
Absolutely. Jade, you and I both are old dogs in the space, but we've been talking about that for so long, about companies just really underutilizing their talent databases, and glad to see that is finally changing with recruitment marketing platforms such as Talemetry in the space, and just being more proactive with nurturing those individuals on a regular basis, because there's always that segment of future fit and individuals, as well as silver medalists, that you're going to want to reach out to on a regular basis and keep those relationships nurtured, for sure. Now we're going to segue into the glamorous realm of the online application, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek because there's a lot of exciting things that have kind of transformed the application, making it much more user friendly, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit in this particular segment. But first, some kind of key highlights from our research that I want to point out. Again, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I want to point out a couple of different things. One that I find fascinating is that most employers in our research every year, and I would probably argue most employers in general, are offering mobile apply these days. However, in our research, it's only 14% of the candidates said they actually apply via mobile. I know that's going to grow. I know it's only going to get bigger. And when you talk specifically to companies that, whether they're actually the mobile companies themselves, actually in the business of this, having a much higher conversion rate overall. And we've seen the numbers for across industries growing. I know this will grow. What we don't ask is like how much are you using your mobile devices just to access career sites, look at jobs, etc. We're asking literally, do you apply? I know that's only going to grow, but it always just is kind of a little bit shocking when looking at those numbers. Another important thing to point out is that those candidates that have an overall 5-star experience in our research, over half of them, just over half, are able to understand where they're at in the application process and some kind of a progress indicator, whether that be text-based, visual, something static. There's not a lot of over the top visuals that I've seen today. Like, for example, if you think about the Domino's pizza example, I always like to bring that up. You order Domino's pizza, for those who know what I'm talking about, you order online, and then you see that kind of status indicator of where you're at, so it shows that they're prepping the pizza and they're baking it, and then it's out for delivery. And it's kind of cool because it's real time via the web. And organizations are kind of leaning in that direction now, at least for those that have higher positive candidate ratings, so that it's not just this mysterious process of when I apply. I know what's the next steps in the process, and I think that's one thing key to point out, that a lot of companies that have higher positive candidate ratings are doing that. One thing that unfortunately too many companies are still doing is, and this is again where being able to up the ante on your automated communications that go out, as well as the human touch, which I know it's harder to do for companies that have volume on the application side. But in our research, over 52%, just thereabouts, of applicants or candidates tell us that they're just not hearing back after they apply 2-3+ months later. And maybe they hear back on day 91, but that's a long time. And yes, some would argue that, well, we do send out our automated messages, within the first few days of them applying. But there's still a lot of folks that just are never hearing back again after they apply. And it's something that we see every single year in the data. And it's actually higher again this year, unfortunately, compared to last year. Every year it is a different pool of candidates, granted, but it's still a trend that we don't like to see, and something that I think a lot of organizations can actually improve upon. And then application, this is kind of a softball, but it's really important to point out, for those overall who are having a 5-star candidate experience. And one thing I didn't point out that I do want to emphasize right now, that 85% of the candidates in North America this year did not get the job. We're really focused on looking at the aggregate impact on your business and your brand of most of those that you reject versus those you hire. And that's a greater volume, right? 99 out of 100 people for any given job aren't getting the job. And over time, there's a greater impact on your business and your brand. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at our numbers, that most of these folks didn't get the job. So those who are having an overall 5-star, obviously the application process is very easy for them. It's a better user experience, and we're going to talk about what some of those things mean. And those who don't have really struggle with it overall. And then when we compare again winners to everybody else in what they're doing on the application, again, there's an 8% difference on the 5-star side, that winners have a big edge again in overall better positive experience when it comes to the application process. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. I've already referenced this a few times, making sure that they understand next steps, that there's fairness in the process. If you tell them, if it's going to take 3 to 4 weeks for you to get back to them after they apply, don't tell them it's going to take 1 to 2 weeks. And sometimes organizations may not even realize that they've already embedded something in automated messages, and then there's this disparity of delay. You gotta. These are things that you can quickly shore up. They don't take a lot of time. They just need to identify what they are and change that, because that can go a long way. If you're clear with me that it's going to be, these are the next steps and this is how long it's going to take. I may not like it, but I get it. As opposed to making it a surprise and/or being unclear about it. Another thing that we recommend at the Talent Board every single time when it comes to the application process is, please apply for your own jobs. Please go through your process. and apply for your jobs, make notes of what makes sense, what doesn't, and understand that what it's like to be a candidate going through your application process, or and any process for that matter, but particularly anything that's online. Not just to find if there are any, page errors or anything, any redundancies that you could probably take out of the process, just to understand what it's like. One thing, and then to make sure those autoresponders, those auto rejection notices, don't go out immediately after somebody hits submit. Make sure they're set for 24 hours, 48 hours later. Give it some breathing room. If you're doing auto screening and auto rejections, make sure it doesn't happen immediately, because that really can adds up against you at the end of the day. And I've seen it time and again. And then give the opportunity, besides letting them share whatever your application process is, ask the question before they submit, is there anything else you'd like to tell us that we didn't ask you? That's another question that can go a long way. In fairness, it's kind of like the alternative to a cover letter, right? Giving them a little box to just write a few more things that may be of value to you, but it's definitely a value to them to being able to express it as well. One of the things that we also find is that the application process, the trend has been to really improve the user experience and collapsing the time that it takes to get into the first gate, so the first door, whatever metaphor of choice. 15 minutes or less for the application. Now, not every company is comfortable doing that, because some of you may have an assessment on the front end that you still got to build in. I was really fascinated to hear a healthcare organization that had a application process that still took 45 minutes that included an assessment. It was primarily focused on it was nursing candidates. That was part of the research that they did with us, and they had a really high positive rating. That worked. But what you see more of the time is that it's a collapse process, and then you get them in the door, and then you let your other back end processes take over. Assessment, screening, your team screening, whatever the thing is, moving people on the pipelines. Then that's more of the trend that we see, and then making sure that you're getting the definitive closure. If you're not going to, if they're going to be rejected at the point of application, make sure it's clear that, and give them closure at the end of the day. And then that's a part of the communication and feedback as well. And then this is just my little cycle again of what, on the application side, apply for your own jobs, always post expectations and what are next steps. You could even leverage, again, the customer service approach of answering questions about the application process live, as well as even chat bots that are being experimented with. Make sure to delay those auto rejections. And is there anything else you'd like to tell us? Now, as it relates to that, I'm going to let now Jade share some of his tips when it comes to the application process and candidate experience.
Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, when we look at this and go in and benchmark, and we look at enterprise companies, large companies, and their application process, and we like to measure one key point, which is, of the people who are starting your application process, how many complete? And that percentage matters a lot. And in general, we see that number being about a 20% number on most enterprise clients. And this is from a fairly configured process. And there's a few things that you can do to improve that dramatically, which we'll talk about in a second. I think the importance of this number is, if 80% are not completing your application, you've spent money to get them to start the application, they were interested enough to click apply in the first place. And those are pretty important people to you, if not for this job, for future jobs, and for your talent pool. Also, the people who abandon the process first are genuinely and often the best candidates, because the best candidates often don't need a job. And if you've gotten somebody who is in that category of a passive candidate and you got them to a process, those people are the ones you want to make the process most work for and pull through the process from a quality perspective. So this isn't just a quantity conversation, it's a quality conversation. So, the first thing that we would say is do you have a report that you're looking at every week on your candidate drop-off? So of who started to apply, how many completed the apply, and are you looking at the efficiency of that through many of the different techniques that Kevin was just mentioning, improving that. The key one that we see absolutely is if you are asking somebody to register before they then apply. So you think about this from your own experiences. You're looking at shopping online, and you might want to put something in your shopping cart. And before you can do that, you have to go and fill in your credit card information. It's just out of line with the expectations, and we see this industry-wide still as a practice that is really damages your results. So if you're asking for that registration first, that will drop off about half of your candidates right there before they get to the next step. Making sure, and as Kevin just mentioned, break your application process into multiple steps. So we like to say, capture the lead, capture their resume first, saying, hey, thanks for your interest in this job. Please just upload your resume, and we'll send you the next steps in a while of the extra information that you need to collect. Really improves the experience to make this a bit of a dialogue back and forth through whatever technology you use to do that. Mobile enabled isn't mobile optimized. We see a lot of clients saying we need a more mobile application process, which you do, and transferring their desktop application processes simply to a mobile process, and it isn't the same. Your experience of how you interact with something on a mobile device needs to fundamentally be a fair bit different, and important to look into that. These candidates, and Kevin mentioned this a while ago, these candidates start their journey not on your website. They start it maybe on a job board where they saw your job advertisement, and then they come through. You have to actually start that journey, as Kevin says, apply for your own jobs, but apply for them starting out there. Start on a vendor, on a job board where you see your job, and then click through and understand the full candidate journey, because there's a lot of inefficiencies in that broader process of how they get to you that cause drop-off in your process that you want to understand, and there's a lot that you can do about optimizing that with your vendors as well. We talked about before, don't drive for them to enter in information that you already have. If you know who they are and you're bringing them back, pre-fill out their application form for them. And if they stop, if for some reason you have abandonment, they started to apply, what are you doing to bring those people back? So do you have a process in your application process saying, hey, those 80% who didn't complete, are we automatically reaching out and say, hey, you started, you want to finish it now? Maybe they got interrupted. So how are you bringing them back into the process to make sure you're driving them? These are pretty common, again, consumer marketing online experiences that people are used to. And I think just making sure that you're thinking of it in that context and evolving your application process to meet that need.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I like the point about eliminating the need for candidate registrations. Absolutely. Because again, we all need another login like a hole in the head. There you go. Now, the last thing I want to touch on as we kind of bring the webinar close to a close is everything that you do in talent acquisition, from pre-application all the way beyond application to onboarding, whether they're external candidates, internal candidates, it doesn't really matter. Everything you do goes back to this whole aspect of having a relationship with them and what they're willing to do going forward. So in our data, when we correlate the relationship question that I referenced earlier about, how likely are you to change your status with us based on your experience, and we correlate that with the 1 and 5 star overall experience, we see that on the more positive side, I always like the glass is always half full for me, everybody. So I always start there. The better experience, those 5-star candidates, 74% of the time say that they're going to increase the business relationship, which means they're willing to, they say, at least through our research, to apply again, to refer others, and buy stuff if and when applicable, right? Whatever that means to them. That's great. And that's actually 10% higher in North America this year than it was last year. And this also trends globally, similar numbers in EMEA and APAC. There you go. But the other side, the 1-star crummy time, 46% of those candidates say that they're willing to sever the relationship, to walk away and never associate with you again. That's 3% higher than last year. And even if a fraction of them, 10, 15%, whatever that is, put their money where their mouth is, if you're a consumer business, that can definitely be significant impact to your immediate revenue. As many of our survey participants know, the employers that are consumer businesses, or even if you're not, referral networks alone, and the key people that you do want to come back and applying again, you might be losing out on them. And that eventually does impact revenue, because if you don't have the people that you need to grow and sustain your business, it's just a little harder to quantify. But every year it trends this way. Every year there's a positive and negative potential impact on your business. And when we look at the global numbers, again, as I mentioned, it's very similar numbers. 41% will walk who have a 1-star experience, and 64% will increase who have a 5-star. we see that every year. And based on, this is still tens of thousands of candidates, and when you expand from the sample, our sample sets, it translates into millions of candidates around the world that are willing to do these things based on how they feel they're being treated in the recruiting process overall. And so listen, let's talk about some measurements specifically when it comes to recruitment marketing, Jade, and how that kind of rounds out what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think the things that we want to talk about, kind of a recap, we touched on many of these, as you're looking at your overall recruitment marketing approach, and you're driving candidates to be interested and then apply and build relationships with them. What we think are the key things to measure: how many people are you reaching? So on a monthly basis, how many unique individuals are seeing your job ads, whether it's on job boards or your career site or your email messages, et cetera? What's your reach and exposure? Is that growing? And the relevance of that audience is important too, right? How many of your target audience of people are you reaching, and do you have that data? If you think of marketing companies and consumer marketing, they say, well, I'm trying to reach college students. There's X million of them in the U.S., and I'm reaching 82% of that market with my marketing. Thinking about it in terms of reach and exposure is important to understand what's important to you against your goals. Managing, as we said before, your conversion of people from all of those different channels, whether it's your social channels, your advertising channels, your website, your email campaigns, from all of those different activities that you do to reach people, which ones are working in terms of conversion, how many are coming in, and how many of those are you ultimately hiring from each of those channels, right? Because applications isn't the end goal. Often, the hires are the end goal. So how many people did you hire from that vendor or that channel? It's important to measure that on an ongoing basis and have that in front of you to make decisions from. Growth and performance of your talent database. So how many people are in your talent database that you're able to reach out to? How many? What's the engagement level of that database in terms of the maturity of those relationships? So of that database, do 70% of them have they done something with you, looked at some career content, or come to your career site in the last 6 months? How long have they had a relationship with you? So thinking of that engagement of that database. And being able to measure that, very important. And then as you execute specific campaigns, whether that's a job or broader campaigns for specific hiring events, et cetera, that you're running, what's your effectiveness of those individual campaigns? Are they working to drive the results that you hoped for that campaign and delivering what you want? And at the end of the day, the money that you're spending to the vendors out there to help in this are important to you. They're part of your ecosystem. And which ones are really working for you, and which ones do you maybe need to rethink your spend. So that's the stuff that we think is really important as you look at your overall recruitment marketing processes to keep front and center. Do you have a dashboard that can give you this type of information like marketing departments do on their consumer marketing? Do you have that for your organization?
Absolutely. So based on everything that Jade and I have shared today, and all the best practices from the kind of the macro data research perspective down to the really the 1-2 punch of what you should be doing in recruitment marketing and the application process. At the end of the day, it's not about just getting people in the seats and filling those racks. It's about improving the impact on your bottom line over time, because recruiting has a huge impact on the business. On an ongoing basis, because you can't forget the fact that you're constantly recruiting to retain your employees as well. So that said, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and Carrie wanted to check in to see if we had any questions for either Jade and I, and we're happy to answer them with some of the time we have left.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the question box on the portal itself. There was a question about getting the deck sent out, and yes, the recording will be available as well as the deck following the webinar. So please just let us know if you have any questions or need anything else with that.
And I'm sure that whether it be myself or Jade and team, if you've got any questions for either of us, even after the fact, you're like, wow, I wish I would have asked that, feel free to reach out. Happy to have a conversation. I always love talking shop. So I'm sure Jade and team feel the same way. So just definitely let us know.
Kevin, one question that came in,
Sure.
curious about the change in the trends in the candidate experience. So I know you mentioned you guys have done this for a couple of years. I think the question was about how has it changed over the last couple of years?
Well, you know, it's interesting to answer that question. It hasn't really changed that much. In fact, this is the 7th year that we've actually been doing it, and really the third year where we have a really reliable and valid survey tool that we've been evolving over time. It hasn't changed very much. And what's happened though is, unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a negative slide that we've seen in the data for the past 3 years. There's been a more increase in negative sentiment, less candidates being contacted, less closure happening in the process. But at the same time, what we see in the overall positive candidate ratings, and the companies at least that are willing to take the step and put themselves out there and ask their candidates directly what they think. But we are also seeing kind of a very much more higher positive candidate ratings, not just in companies that have already been doing this year after year, but new companies that have never done any measurement before, but have put things in place in their organization, some of which we've discussed, have huge ratings. But there's the negative. There's just there's been a gradual negative slide overall in a lot of these ratings, and less communication, less feedback. Part of that could be the reason for there's more automation that we're trying to figure out how to better leverage, and especially mid-sized and enterprise companies where there's a higher volume of individuals that we're having to deal with. But that's really what I see. The trends, more of a negative slide, and the fact that there is definitely a definitive potential impact on the business.
Great. And Jade, one question that came in regarding the marketing measurements that you reviewed. Where do you find the biggest opportunity for improvement for most organizations?
Yeah, we like to think of that in a graduating cycle. So we have a maturity model that is able to kind of gauge where people are with their recruitment marketing campaigns and capabilities. And so the ROI is different at different points. Right at the beginning, as you're starting looking, I think the first place is looking at that conversion of your apply process, because everything you do from there on in will be impacted by that. So we think that's the first place to look and make sure that that's optimized, and then all the other activities and programs that we're going to recommend and see are going to be multiplied by a factor of whatever you improve there. So I'd say that's first. I think the second, as we talked about earlier, is focusing on your talent database being your primary source of hire for you. Over time, the ROI on that is incredible. If we have a client that now has close to 15 million candidates in their database, that's 10% of the resumes in the United States, right? And in a given market segment, once you have a database of that size, if it's properly segmented and you're working it, you probably don't need to advertise much anymore and spend that money. You probably don't need to source a lot of new. Obviously, you're going to be doing a degree of that, but your shift of where your resources goes really changes, and the effectiveness of your hiring programs really change, and the quality of your results really change as well. So I think those are the two to keep in mind.
Great. That's all the questions that I see coming in so far, Kevin and Jade.
Great.
Great.
Well, thanks again to everybody for joining us today, and Jade, thank you, and Carrie and team.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think thanks for all the good work you have in pushing this message out to the market. We appreciate it. I think it's a very important conversation to have with the industry, and it's great work. And have a very happy Halloween.
Absolutely, you as well, and that's everybody as well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.